Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Day-Brosnan and I work in the school attendance policy team here at the department. This afternoon's session is all about how schools and trusts can build relationships and work really effectively with families, the local authority and other partners in line with our new attendance guidance. I'm very pleased to be joined today by staff from Sapientia Education Trust, and that includes Jonathan Taylor, who's the CEO, Emma Davis, who's the Director of Primary Standards at the Trust, Becky Arnold, who's head of Framingham Earl High School, and Dan Halls, who is the Director of Safeguarding Attendance across the Trust. As usual, we'll be having a short section at the end for Q&A, so please submit any questions in the sidebar as we go along. And as many people on this call will already know, we've run a number of these sessions already, and you should be able to find links to all of the previous recordings in the sidebar as well. And that includes a kind of overview webinar that we ran about the key changes in the guidance. Next week, we've also got Unity Schools Partnership, who are talking about their approach to using attendance data across their trust. So please look out for that and sign up for that if you are interested. Before I hand over to Jonathan, firstly, I actually just wanted to briefly summarise two of the kind of relevant sections in the guidance that we'll be discussing today. So can I have the next slide, please? There we are. So the first expectation that you can see here is about building really strong relationships with families and working to remove any barriers that pupils face to regularly attending school. As everyone on this call will be aware, this is about engaging with families, understanding what the issues are, and then taking a kind of firm but supportive approach to addressing those barriers. So in the first instance, obviously, schools will want to consider if there are specific in-school barriers to attendance, and then what action can be taken to address those. And then if there are barriers that are identified which are outside of the school's control, we would expect the school and the local authority to work together to support the pupil and the family to access any specific support that they need. And this could involve a kind of range of different potential measures and interventions put in place to support the pupil and the family. Where absence is getting worse, of course, the support may need to be intensified, and it might even need to be formalised in the form of a parenting contract or an education supervision order. And if the voluntary support has not been effective or it hasn't been engaged with, we are clear that schools and local authorities can still continue to take further action, and this might include attendance enforcement action. But in terms of the first expectation, the emphasis is really on support and understanding in the first place, and then enforcement action taken as a last resort if support has not been engaged with. The second expectation that relates to this area that Sapientia will be discussing is about collaborative working between schools and other partners. So alongside working with the local authority, we know that some of the strongest schools actually build links with community, youth and voluntary groups locally to support their attendance efforts. And that would be alongside other statutory partners like the police and health services. We also obviously expect schools to share the necessary data with local authorities about attendance on a regular basis, so that local authorities are able to discharge their duties effectively and the kind of roles and responsibilities that we've set out in this guidance. And there's also a section in the guidance about all partners locally sharing relevant information to inform the kind of conversation and to inform what broader support might be needed for individual pupils. As we set out at the bottom of this slide, the department is also currently trialling a daily data collection, and we're looking to actually share attendance data back with schools, trusts and local authorities in a more timely fashion. And I would encourage everybody, if you haven't already seen that or signed up already, to look at that trial and give your consent to share your data, because we think that could be something that's particularly valuable for local authorities who don't always get access to school attendance data. Right, that's the two kind of key sections in the guidance that I wanted to give an overview of in the first instance. If I can get the next slide, I'll also just briefly touch on what schools can expect from their local authority. So I've set out in high level terms how we expect schools to work with the LA, but what can schools actually expect from their local authority? I'll sort of pick out a few of the kind of really key points here. So every local authority we expect from next academic year to have a named contact in the attendance support team who schools can contact specifically about attendance issues. So that should be a single named person that schools can get in touch with for advice, guidance and support. We obviously also expect local authorities to be holding termly targeting support meetings with every school in the authority area, and that would be an opportunity for the local authority to discuss with that school individual pupils or cohorts that might need specific targeted attendance support from the local authority. And the final one that I just want to bring to people's attention is that we expect the school and the local authority to agree a joint approach and a plan for every severely absent pupil within the school. So that is to say every pupil that misses 50% or more, there should be a joint plan and approach that's agreed between the school and the authority about how that pupil's attendance is going to be improved. All of this is set out, I think, in more detail in the new guidance, but I really wanted to kind of give a framing and an overview ahead of Jonathan and the rest of the team talking about what they do at Sapientia, but of course encourage everybody to look at the guidance and read it in more detail if they haven't done so already. But I think everyone is most interested to hear the kind of practical example and what schools and trusts are doing already. So I'll hand over now to Jonathan, who's going to introduce the work of Sapientia and how their trusts and schools deliver in these areas.
Thank you, Will. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jonathan Taylor, Chief Executive of Sapientia, and our team are very much looking forward to sharing some of our approaches and insights with you for the next 30 minutes or so. At the outset, it's really important just to state that this is an approach that we have embedded for a number of years. It's evolved over time, and we hope by sharing with you some of the practice that has been effective in our schools, and particularly by drilling down into case studies of 2 schools, that this will help you reflect and potentially inform future practice. The backdrop around attendance is obviously crucial, and rightly, as we emerge out of the pandemic, been given great emphasis, and we very much as a trust welcome the new guidance from the department and very much look forward to working within the framework, but also the philosophical slight shift in approach about starting with an emphasis of building relationships, working with families, external agencies and other partners, but underpinned by the more punitive, if that's the correct word, approaches that occasionally are needed. As a trust, we operate in a number of different contexts. Could I have the next slide, please? We currently run 16 schools across Norfolk and Suffolk, 1 school that is an infant nursery school, 9 primary schools and 6 secondary schools. We vary in context. We have urban fringe schools, schools that serve market towns, and also some very small rural schools, particularly small rural primaries. And what our team is going to share this afternoon is work in 2 of our schools. The first, Rockland St Mary, which is a small primary school just outside Norwich, and the second, Framingham Earl High School, which is a larger 11 to 16 comprehensive school I would describe as an urban fringe school. I think it's important just to state also as a trust that our schools work individually. Whilst we give central team support and we have a trust attendance and safeguarding lead, the real work for us around attendance is driven at school level, and that's why we will share with you case studies and examples of the work that our schools have undertaken. Next slide, please. However, having said that, we do work around a common set of principles and values. We believe and have for a number of years that key work on attendance really relates around having a very strong emphasis on working with families and working with partner agencies. We accept that a range of other approaches work alongside what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. Will has already referenced the other range of webinars that have taken place or will take place. And this should be seen in context alongside those in terms of the information that we're sharing with you this afternoon. We do use data, and we have increasingly used data in a proactive as opposed to reactive way, and emphasising constantly the importance of early and rapid intervention. I think crucially, we have invested in our schools. We've invested in time, in staffing, and in resources to emphasise our work around attendance. This includes at all levels, having clarity around senior leadership roles around attendance, but also training and giving responsibility to all elements of school staff, including tutors, class teachers, but also our wider support staff and office teams. I would emphasise the importance of staff buy-in and raising expectation, so everybody in the school community is involved in highlighting the importance and pursuing attendance issues. Class teacher, a tutor, a reception worker, we all contribute together. And one thing that we have done that has been really effective in a number of schools is explicitly put attendance as a staff appraisal target. Fundamentally, though, for us, school ethos and school engagement is crucial. And as we move to look at our first case study, which is St Mary, Rockland St Mary Primary School, we did a lot of work initially, really improving the overall quality of the education being offered. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'd firstly like to introduce myself. My name is Emma Davis and I'm the Director of Primary across Sapientia. I work particularly close with all our primary schools. I'm going to use a specific case study today based on Rockland St Mary's School. I'm really going to explore some of the most effective strategies in managing attendance. The school has experienced particular success with attendance. Of course, work is still ongoing, but we have seen some significant improvements. Next slide, please. Thank you. I think it's probably important that I give you a little bit of a context around the school. So Rockland St Mary's School is a small rural school, about 67 pupils. It's located about 6 miles south of Norwich, and it really does sit in the heart of a small rural community. It consists of 3 classes and most recently a nursery school. The school has just above average free school meals. In 2019, persistent absentee was above national, and at the point of joining the trust, Key Stage 2 attainment was well below national. You can see there in 2015, the school had an RI Ofsted judgment, and the school joined Sapientia in 2017. And now we're pleased to say that attendance is above national. Persistent absence has significantly been reduced and now below national. Outcomes are above national, and we're thrilled that in early this year actually we achieved a good in Ofsted. Next slide, please. So this is a quote taken directly from our Ofsted report, and we were really pleased that the inspector and the process had recognised the efforts, hard work and determination of all the stakeholders involved. Particularly like to draw your attention to the sentence in blue, and this was key to our success. It states clearly there that we've worked with the families, not against, but with, and this sat really at the heart of everything the school has done. It's been about developing a culture around those high expectations, and fundamentally this has been about building strong relationships with our communities. Next slide, please. I'm now going to talk about the hows really, but I think it's probably important to highlight that this, a sustained change takes time, and attendance certainly isn't something that can be ticked off. We kind of quickly realised that, attendance can't be viewed in isolation, and we wanted to start by looking at our holistic offer of education. Ultimately, we wanted our children to want to come into school. We wanted our children to value education, parents to value education. We wanted our children to go home from school and talk about their school day. Ultimately, we wanted to improve their school experience. So initially, we place a huge emphasis on our curriculum, on personal development. As Jonathan mentioned, better resources, enrichment of the curriculum, trips, visitors, those wow moments, those memorable experiences that encourage our children to talk to their parents about their school experience. We wanted to increase their sense of belonging to the school, their sense of pride, their responsibilities, and underpinning all of that work really was a big drive around, I suppose, relaunching the school values. Rockland St Mary have 4 R's as their school values: resilience, respect, resourcefulness and reach. And a big piece of work was about relaunching those across the whole of the community. We wanted to give attendance and everything else some momentum, something to pin something back to. We needed to create a common language, a buy-in amongst our communities, but it allowed attendance to be talked about in context, raising those expectations. As I mentioned, the school does sit in the heart of a rural community, and therefore what that means is that the staff know our families incredibly well. But what we needed to do was further improve engagement on a more purposeful level. We needed to involve parents and carers in their child's education, and that involved many kind of strategies, but including parent cafes, for example, phonics cafes, celebration events, even the other way around where staff attended local community events. But ultimately, this was about building relationships with the parents and improving or increasing parents' value of education and how they fit into that bigger that puzzle. Of course, a big piece of work was also around educating the community on attendance, real clear policy, real clear messaging, a consistent messaging, a drip feed approach kind of through newsletters, staff interaction, celebration events, etc. Attendance was and still is really kind of under that spotlight at all times. Next slide, please. Of course, all of this, was strategically planned for. Attendance sits at the heart of school improvement plan, so all stakeholders are aware. Progress is reviewed frequently. We introduced a breakfast club, really targeted pupils and families. Like that nice soft start to the day, ultimately reducing potential barriers to attendance. A huge piece of our work was really around the system and processes around the analysis of data, but not just the analysis of data, the important part of the data, asking those so what questions. What are we going to do with this data that we gathered? And that involved like that half-termly robust data analysis, really drilling down into patterns and trends. Being such a small school, there's that contextual understanding around families' barriers. But as a result of this data, it was important that we had a really clear system. So there would be a series of letters sent out at the end of each half term, a well done letter if attendance was over 97%, a letter of an expression of concern if attendance fell below 97%, and those children at risk of persistent absentee or are persistent absentees, and they would be invited in for a meeting. There's a real graduated follow-up approach around that. I think it's important to talk about the tone of the letter. Absolutely, we need to be clear and transparent with our message, but it needed to be of a supportive nature. We needed to work with the families. At first, when these letters went out, of course, not all parents were used to that style, but now it really is typicality, and parents expect them on a half-termly basis. I think the meetings also had a similar tone to the letters. We need to be working with our parents and not against, and our job as professionals is to find out what the barriers are and ultimately work out how we can support our families. We needed to listen, we needed to remain professionally curious and ask those right questions, but ultimately never lower our expectations. We really needed that restlessness and a relentless approach. On top of that termly data, there is a daily analysis. It's not as formal as the half-termly data analysis, but there is a clear communication between the head teacher and the office staff, daily finding out who's off today, and with those clear follow-up phone calls, I suppose pursuing with the parents why, and asking those right questions. Next slide, please. So part of the strategy, we also work with the office staff. We really needed to ensure that, of course, they knew the policy around coding and procedures, but also that they were confident enough to challenge parents, and not just that, you know, thanks for letting us know. We needed our office staff to be confident enough to ask the whys and have clear expectations around authorised absence. Of course, there were weekly DSL meetings, but also looked at attendance, a real coordinated approach to that. You know, and Jonathan mentioned this earlier, but it really still is a high profile amongst all staff. Specific CPD given out to staff around attendance, and as Jonathan said, included on some of our appraisal some of staff's appraisal targets as well. Next slide, please. Of course, for, you know, more challenging cases, there has to be a joined up approach needed. That can involve team around the child meeting, family support process, a real multi-agency approach. At Rockland St Mary's School, the head teacher is also the SENCO, and that really helps with those clear lines of communication. The Trust works really proactively with the local authority. We use fining as a last resort. And in some cases, we have used a joint medical protocol where no evidence has been given for health-cited reasons. I think, you know, I've kind of given quite a few examples there, but in summary, it really has been a coordinated strategic process. We've had continual review points throughout. It's been a huge culture shift, and that takes time, as I said at the beginning. But I think kind of key points for us is that, I suppose, consistency of a shared language, a transparency. Actually, this is a minimum expectation. This is what we expect at Rockland St Mary and Sapientia. So that kind of relentlessness approach, and underpinning everything, it really was kind of firmly built on building those strong relationships with parents and ensuring that they value the child's education. That's me. I'll hand you over to Becky Arnold. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Next slide, please. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about my school. So I took over as head here at Fram in January 2020. So when I started at the school, we decided that attendance was going to be one of our key themes. Just to give you a little bit of context on the school, you can see on this slide here just some key facts about our school. So we're a year 7 to 11 provision. We only offer GCSE. There's no specialist provision on site. We are a community school, so what we wanted to make sure is that everybody was involved in all the strategies that we had here at Fram. Our current attendance figures for year to date are 94.5% overall, and we're really proud of that. And our persistent absence, excluding COVID, is 9.3%. And you'll see lots of the strategies that we're using to support those young people. Next slide, please. So when I started here at Fram, attendance was a real concern. Obviously, for me as a new head teacher in post, I absolutely knew that I wanted to be working on the children's achievement, not just academically, but their all-round education. And obviously, if they're not in school, then they're not able to do those things. There were no clear pathways within the school as to what would happen at different levels of student attendance. And similarly, there wasn't an ethos in the school, either with the teaching staff or with families, about thinking about attendance as one of our priorities. Next slide, please. So as Emma was saying, lots of what we've done here at Sapientia Trust is all about culture and ethos, and it's about that buy-in from families. We needed families to be at the heart of everything that we did. We wanted them to understand why we wanted the children in school. We changed the way that we were talking about attendance. Rather than talking about days lost, we were talking about lessons lost, because one day out of 365 days in a year maybe doesn't seem that much, but when we were talking about 5 lessons, or what percentage that was maybe of the curriculum that the children had missed, that started to have more of an impact. We wanted everybody to understand why attendance was so important, but we also wanted to create working relationships. We didn't want it to be a black and white system where a certain percentage of non-attendance meant a legal intervention. We wanted to carry on working with our school and have that real community sense of working together. Next slide, please. So one of the very first things that we did is we changed the way that we had our attendance team structure. And I would say that for me, maybe the most important thing that I did, my deputy head teacher became our attendance lead. If you wanted to get in touch with us as a school, or you wanted to get in touch with James, because lots of the work that I'm talking to you about today is things that James has led, you can find him on Twitter or via our school website, and he'd be very happy to meet with anybody or talk to you and give you some more details as well. But our attendance team changed, so we then had a deputy head teacher right at the heart of what we were doing, and we also made sure that we had a non-teaching pastoral worker employed. It's something that obviously lots of other schools had, but it wasn't something that we had here at Fram, and we worked really carefully on that job description, so the focus was on family engagement as well as working with individual children. We have a listening service here at Fram as well, and we increased the hours for that because we knew that children needed people to be able to talk to, and providing that space was for some children going to allow them to access learning within their day. We also had a therapy dog come to start working in school because we knew that that was something that the children would appreciate, and in other schools it's been proven to be really successful. We made sure that everybody who was working on our attendance team was DSL trained, and whilst that was quite an investment both financially and with time, it's meant that everybody who's involved in attendance is able to understand that wider profile of the child when it comes to safeguarding. We also made sure that we had calendared meetings each half term, which were called Team Around the Child meetings. As I'm sure lots of you will appreciate, in a secondary school, getting everybody together is quite difficult. So we did need to make sure that they were calendared and protected times, so all of those people could meet together. We also have a weekly attendance meeting with a smaller group of people getting together. We made sure as well that with everything that we were doing, we were feeding back to all staff, so everybody knew that they were included in what we were doing. That was both in our face-to-face weekly tutor meetings and also in our student bulletin each week. Next slide, please. Lots of the things that we've done here, I'm sure lots of you have done in your schools already, but what the real key thing about changing that ethos and that culture has been about over communicating. For us, it's been thinking about different ways and different channels where we can really get our messages so they start to resonate with everybody. So one of the first things we did, we reviewed our home school agreement, and we made sure that attendance was really clearly on there, so everybody was signing up. If you were part of our school, if you were wearing our badge and you're a member of Framley High School, you were agreeing that attendance was something that was important, and you were going to arrive at school every day. You were going to, as a form tutor, you were challenging students who weren't here and supporting them to be here, and as a family you were going to do your utmost to make sure your child was in school. We also made sure that we were working with our primary colleagues. So in all of our transition meetings, what we've made sure is that we've been working with those high profile year sixes, making sure that we're welcoming them into our schools, making sure we know about those children and the background, and also the interventions that have happened before. There's no point, if things haven't worked in primary, thinking that just because they're in a different setting they'll work here. So we wanted to know what had been provided already so that we could adapt our offer. We also made sure that for parents and carers that we have regular items on our newsletter. So all the time we're talking about attendance, we're talking about the importance of being in school, we're talking about the things that are coming up, and also the support services that we have in school for young people. So letting them know about the listening service and how to refer into that service, letting them know about our pastoral workers, letting them know about everything that's going on so that children want to be here and they want to be in Fram as much as possible. We also made sure that we were always praising attendance, and we do that simply with things like display boards with information on attendance and using Twitter to praise it. Obviously, during COVID, that has changed, both with the thresholds and the way that we are praising children for attendance, but it's something that's now coming back. We also have an attendance function on MCAS, so I'm sure lots of you also use Bromcom, but our MIS system allows us to have an app both for children and for parents, and we have the attendance function as part of that. So parents can see and they can check that their children are in school, and they can also see the percentage of the time that they have been with us. What we always wanted to make sure is that attendance was something that everybody knew was a high profile for us. The last thing anybody wants is the first time that they're communicated about attendance for it to be a letter saying that there's a risk of legal action or that something has gone wrong. So we wanted everybody to be on board with that this was a priority for our school. Next slide, please. As I've said already, we really wanted to make sure we were doing lots of positive praise for high attendance. That made it really easy for us with our communication and over communicating about how important attendance was. So lots of these things you'll see here, Emma has talked about, and I know lots of other schools do, but weekly house points and merits for attendance, letters home to praise that attendance, celebration assemblies, and lots of positive messaging with our contact home, making sure that as a common focus, we're always talking about how good it is to see the children in school regularly. Next slide, please. What we have with our attendance team is we have weekly meetings, and so we have key members of the guidance team working together for 1 hour a week, and we make sure that when we are in these meetings we're talking about key students. We're not just talking about those with persistent absence, we're also looking at new patterns. So just recently, it might be the same in other schools as well, we've noticed an upsurge in the number of families wanting to take children out of school for holidays, and obviously we're not authorising those, but we've phoned the local authority and said, you know, is this just to us, is this an issue, or is this something across the county? So we were able to have those conversations when we notice patterns and trends both within our own school and checking those with the local authority, who for us here in Norfolk have always been really supportive. But within those meetings, what we do is we allocate families where we see that there's an attendance issue with the most appropriate key worker. So it might be our SENDCO is working with those families. It might be that a child maybe has had a new diagnosis of something like ASD, and that's become a real barrier to them coming to school. So it's then putting that plan together in the best way to enable that child to come to school, to remove those barriers and help them get in. It might be something to do with medical needs. It might be a child who's pupil premium, so we use our pupil premium champion. All those different people within the school, allocating them and the different families for them to work with. And again, it's about building those relationships. We have face-to-face meetings in school. We've definitely found that for us here at Fram, our parents much prefer to be able to come in and have a conversation with us. A lot of our parents find letters and emails quite threatening, and sometimes over the phone they can be a little bit more difficult to get hold of. So we've found having meetings in school face-to-face with the parent and the child in attendance has been a really positive way to create a shared action plan. What will we do at school? What will the child do for themselves? And what will parents do as well? Obviously, during COVID, that was slightly more challenging, but we've worked around that to make sure that they are face-to-face meetings. We've also used external partners. We have one of the key things that we've had to do is make sure we're aware of all those different agencies that are out there. So you'll see here, attendance entitlement officer, medical needs service, the inclusion service, but also thinking more broadly. Next year we have the MHST team working 1 day a week in our school, so the mental health schools team, and providing those nurses to come in and work in school. We've also used the YMCA, the Young Carers Network, social workers, school nurses, and we make sure we've got that really clear directory for us within school. So when we're thinking about a child with a need, we can look at that menu of support and think, actually, what is right for this child? What will help this child? Because every child's different, just like every adult's different, and they need something that's bespoke to them. If required, if we've used fast tracks and fixed penalty notices, these have been a last resort, and parents are always given plenty of opportunity to improve the situation before they are issued. And again, it's about building those relationships with families so they understand what is coming. We make sure that on our MIS system that we're always making sure that we log all of our meetings and those outcomes, as I'm sure lots of you have similar issues to us. Staff come and go. It would be lovely to say that it's all the same staff who are working with children this year, or we work with them next year, but people are moving on, promotions and other jobs. So we can't just rely on one person having all that information in their head. What we're doing all the time is making sure we're logging it, so we've got a clear audit trail. So actually when we're dealing with a family, we can say, well, we can see this was the support you had last year. We can see this is the action plan, and we're holding ourselves to account as much as possible. Next slide, please. And finally, like I say, a range of personalised strategies, and this is the area where I feel that as a school we have learnt the most in the last 2 years. So we've had to think about how we can personalise our strategies for our young people. I never knew about such technology as a robot that could be in place of a child in school, but we have that. We have 2 of those now in school for young people who are unable to come into school, but actually the robot sits in their place in the classroom. It tracks the teacher, it follows the teacher, they can listen to what's going going on, they can see the PowerPoint, and they can interact back with the class. And it's a brilliant piece of technology that's been able to help us improve the attendance of some of those children. For example, we have a child with with Tourette's, and it's been a new diagnosis for them, and so we've used the robot, so when that child is struggling some days in school, they might do one lesson and where the robot sits in their place and they're in another room with another adult. We've also done things like phased returns, where we've had a child in maybe just to step foot over the threshold of school, just to walk around again. Pip's been really helpful for that, our therapy dog. Pip is always really keen to show children around, and Pip is very good at picking up on the right children to be with. So a child might just come into school for a walk around or to see some friends. We're always liaising with different carers, so children who are in hospital education, working with them, making sure we understand what's going on. Class changes, I'm sure everybody uses those, and form group changes, trying to sort of understand maybe social issues that are going to be a barrier to learning. We've also made sure that our wellbeing support strategies are in place. Support, we're very lucky, we have Nelson's Journey in Norfolk, we have the Nook just down the road from us for those people who've had cancer within their families, and we have a great listening service. So again, having that directory of those local services that we can use to make sure we can support our young people. Like I say, that's our case study here at Fram. Be very happy to be in touch with anybody or answer any questions, but thank you for listening. Thank you. Next slide, and the next person.
Thank you, Becky. It's back to me just to reflect very briefly on the renewed emphasis of the guidance about working with the local authority, and Will mentioned that in his introduction. As both Becky and Emma have already referred to, we have had good, strong ongoing relationships with both Norfolk and Suffolk local authorities, and we very much look forward to building on those moving forward. I think, to me, the key to moving forward is about exploiting the opportunities of common working, and we will be looking for both of those local authorities to work with us with some of our existing protocols, particularly what we call our team around the child processes, and the DFE guidance refers explicitly to team around the school processes. As a trust, we have our own team around the school, and we'll be inviting the local authority to participate alongside what for us is an established process. As a trust, we meet with head teachers on at least a half-termly basis with all of the key professionals, be it educational and our support team, our HR, estates, Dan in terms of his safeguarding and attendance leave, to problem solve issues. And we very much look forward to the local authority developing this team around the school strategy as indicated in the guidance. Norfolk local authority has introduced data collection, so very similar to the DFE trial. That's in its embryonic stages. It's working. What the next stages are, I think, are to move very quickly from the data collection to more rapid analysis and then quicker intervention with the data collection. But the technology is working, certainly in terms of the Norfolk scheme, and I think very much that's a way forward for other local authorities if they're not already doing that. To me, the key working with local authorities beyond the technical side is the access then to the wider support networks. So pulling in social care workers, early help teams, in that collaborative team around the child approach, particularly when families and children we categorise as harder to reach. And to me, that's one of the very exciting things of a more joined up approach moving forward with local authority work. Next slide, please. Will and the team asked us just to think about a couple of very specific questions. The first one was about where there were barriers outside our control, and what I've referred to there I've already mentioned, but they're there for you just as a reference point. But particularly I'd highlight the team around the child processes and the use of early help facilities. We've done a lot of work in some of our schools linking much more explicitly than previously with medical services, particularly with GPs where there were medical issues around children, and that has been in a number of cases really crucial in terms of the constant engagement in the educative process and then helping children who are off school for medical reasons when they're ready to return to school and be supported appropriately. We've referred already, Emma talked a lot, particularly Rockland St Mary, about our engagement with local communities. To us, that is key. The community networks are a crucial way of reaching out and on occasion accessing families that naturally may not access school. And if you're not already doing that, I would emphasise considering a whole community engagement approach within your schools. Next slide, please. This refers predominantly to the data collection and where I feel that this could add value moving forward, but particularly the bottom point here around our team around the child processes, early help referrals, and also the use of parenting contracts, which have been effective, and we very much look forward to that continuing in our ongoing partnership work with local authorities. Next slide, please.
Hello, thank you for that, Jonathan. There's a plane just going over my house, perfectly timed, so sorry about that. My name's Dan Halls, I'm the Director of Safeguarding and Attendance for Sapientia, and if I can have the next slide, please, that would be great. So we've obviously heard a lot about what the great work that Rockland St Mary's and Framlingham Male are doing, and I think this is just a summary of all of those different elements brought together, but I'm going to start at the bottom of the list around just highlighting that it's not easy, and it's having that relentless ambition and an aspiration for children's attendance, that they should be in school if families are choosing to send them to school, and the work that we do is constantly driving that. And I think Emma nicely put it, it's never finished, it's never a finished article, it's constantly looking at what you're doing, and Becky highlighted that in the work that she said that they've done at Fram around constantly challenging what they're doing, making sure that it's fit for purpose, and it's having an impact on children, and ultimately children want to come to school and they feel safe when they're in school and they're enjoying the learning that and the opportunities that they're getting to do while they're in our schools. So yeah, so treating families, parents, families and carers as partners. So a real common approach across the trust is we want to work with families, we want to work with parents and carers, and students as well, to constantly drive their attendance, wanting them to attend school, and that all stems from the really strong relationships that individual schools get to make with their communities and their families, and thinking of ways about how they can increase that, and building on those relationships from a very early stage, from when the children first enter school, whether that be nursery for our primary schools or whether that be year 7, and the work for our secondary schools, and the work that goes on when they join in year 7. And so that relationship is cemented really early on, and then that allows us to appropriately challenge at the right times when their attendance starts to drop down. And Emma talked about Rockland St Mary changed the tone of their letters to make them a bit more softly, a bit more welcoming, but also hammering home the point that attendance is really important. And Becky talked about changing to face-to-face meetings as soon as law allowed us, when during lockdown, and actually having people round the table discussing issues makes it real, and it allows families to feel heard and listened and then understood, and we can then work on the barriers that have been identified and start reducing them and hopefully removing them. Having a senior leader has been key. I think having someone to lead on attendance, driving that culture and ethos throughout the school, but also giving them the freedom to decide what their school needs, and using the data that's available to them and the resources that are available to them, and create an attendance package and an ethos for that school and the community of that school, and then driving that down to staff. So having a real focus across all staff teams around the importance of attendance, and it doesn't matter what your role in school is, whether that be non-teaching or teaching, you play an active role in ensuring that attendance is high on the agenda. And again, going back to what I said at the beginning around children wanting to come to school is absolutely vital, and that's important that all staff are engaged in that. When we initiate support, We do that first through our team around the school meetings, team around the children meetings, and then where appropriate, we engage with external agencies to provide support. But we remain in control of that process so that parents feel that we're there as a supportive nature, and it's not a good cop, bad cop situation. And again, it helps maintain those relationships. And I think an important part of relationships is being able to challenge, isn't it? So, and that's why they're so key. Relentless focus on parental engagement, constantly reminding parents of the importance, and actually parents and carers around the importance of school attendance, how the impact it can have on attainment, the impact it can have on the social side of a child's development, and also just making school exciting, because for some parents they didn't have the best school career, and it's really important they now see that what we're able to do. And then that feeds into regular messaging. We already talked a bit about targeted meetings, and then making sure that we're recognising improvements. So if we've got a child that's medically unable to come to school, but actually when they do come to school, if they're coming to school for the majority of that time or 100% of that time, recognising that, and it's not excluding them because they're not able to come to school. And sort of being creative around how we can do that. So Becky talked about the robots and the added benefits that that's had for children being able to engage with school who aren't able to attend school, but also implementing breakfast clubs, food banks. We've sent materials home so that children can engage with learning at home and bring their parents on board. Yeah, and then in summary, back to what I started with around, it's just not always easy, and I think that's really key that you hear that. And but with that relentless ambition that children want to come to school, and we want them to want to come to school, and we're going to make it an environment whereby that is happening. So I think that's me done. Next slide, last slide.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's been a really comprehensive and varied picture, actually, of the different approaches that you take across the trust, and the case studies of the two schools in particular. I think should give people a real insight into the different kind of strategies that you adopt and the different approaches that you adopt. We've had a number of different questions through. There's a question here. It's not directly on the subject of the kind of building relationships with families, but I wonder if Dan or Becky might be able to speak to this, which is about how you go about tackling punctuality, or if punctuality is an issue within the school or for individual pupils. Is that a precursor to persistent absence issues, and what do you do within your individual school and across the trust to tackle that? Becky, I can see you've got your hand up.
So just to say, for our school, punctuality was an issue. So because punctuality was an issue, again, we changed it. We made it more high profile. So we have members of the senior leadership team on the gate every day. Those children who are late receive an automatic detention for 15 minutes after school that day. And what we've found is that's really kind of stopped the lateness. And that's been really effective. So when children know at our school that they are challenged, then they tend to do the right thing. So again, it was about changing the ethos and the culture, that if they knew that we valued them being here on time, which we do, because we want them in form time in the morning, we want them with their form tutor, building those relationships, having those pastoral messages, then they will be here. But when they thought they could get away with it, then that's what they did.
Excellent. Thanks, Becky. Dan, was there anything that you wanted to add to that, or shall I move on to the next?
I think sorry, Jonathan's got his hand up, but I think also just it should be form part of your attendance monitoring, so your data and looking at your patterns and trends. Is there a particular day when lateness is happening, and targeting that in the same approach as non-school attendance, because I think if every minute a child gets later into the day, that's soon half a day, and then it's easy to get into that pattern of, actually, if I'm not there by lunchtime, do I need to even bother for the afternoon session? So I think it's vital to include that as part of your attendance monitoring and identifying those trends and patterns, and then making those mornings accessible and enjoyable, I think is another key factor.
Jonathan, I think you had something to add.
I did, yes. Just one very practical strategy that I've seen in a school, not in our trust, was around breakfast. and subsidising breakfast and encouraging children to come in and have breakfast before school. That had a very significant impact in an inner city secondary school that I visited.
Excellent, thank you. There was a question here about where a family just won't engage at all. They won't come into the school to discuss what support can be provided and to discuss the plan that can be put in place. I assume you've had these situations across the trust and across the schools that you work in. Becky, if I can start with you, probably most relevant, I imagine, to the context that you've been working in.
We've done home visits before, so we've gone round to family homes, and we've, because if a child is missing, if that's a safeguarding risk, if we're not hearing from a parent and they're not engaging, they're not talking to us. So we have done that before. We've just sort of checked that we've got eyes on the family, that they're still there, they're still at that address, and then if needs be, sometimes it's been something like involving other services, so maybe involving children's advice and duty service desk, maybe involving early help, making sure that family understand and they value education. But again, we try not to get to that stage, and we try and make sure that we've built a relationship before then, and we understand the families.
Excellent, thank you. Jonathan.
Yeah, one of our schools has got quite an innovative project underway with a local supermarket chain. So the local supermarket has agreed to fund teas and coffees for a limited period of the week, where school staff meet in that supermarket's cafe with parents and families. Again, that's been very successful.
Excellent. We have had about 4 or 5 questions about robots and about how robots are used and where people can find more information out about the robots. I wonder if I can come to you again, Becky, in the first instance on that one.
You certainly can. I can pass you some more information when you put it live as to where our robots are from and how we have used them. It's a really good program. There's really clear data protection information. Nothing is stored on the robot. It's just a live stream, and there's an onboarding session that we have done with our staff. We did it as a trial with a few teachers. Those teachers were then really keen, and because they were keen and they said actually it's really easy, there's kind of no hard work with it, then other staff got on board as well. So for us, it's something that we've used over the last maybe 18 months, and it's now more embedded. And I think everybody's had, we call it the robot, but everyone's had the robot in their room at some point for different children. But while you're now answering the questions, I'll see if I can find the specific name of the device and pass it on to you.
Excellent, thank you. There was another question as well. Jonathan, you reflected on this, and Becky, you talked about it, and indeed the whole team have. But is there more that you wanted to say about practically building relationships with some of those external partners and services? There was some questions about, well, how do we actually go about doing this in the first place? Dan, you had your hand up. Do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, so most local authorities should have they should publish their local offer and their early help services. So I think that's a good place to start, finding that directory, they can be quite interactive tools. So you can drill down to your postcode and your locality, which is useful to then know the services that are available to you in local touching distance, for want of a better word. And then I think it's about just being bold and engaging with them and saying, what can you do for us? And the new guidance that was released last month talks a lot about how local authorities are encouraging other agencies, and including non-voluntary, around engaging with schools and what their role is in improving attendance. So hopefully we'll see an increase in them wanting to engage with schools. But I think it's about identifying the services in your area, what you need, and then talking to them and saying, help us.
Jonathan.
I'd just add, we've used the word restlessness and a number of times in this presentation. We will pursue the local authority until we get an answer. So in many cases that will be head teacher, senior leadership teams to the head teacher not getting an answer to our director of education, or to Emma in her Director of Primary role, they don't get an answer to me, and I'll go to the Director of Children's Services and actually be very insistent that in our hardest to reach cases, if we're not getting engagement, that we need it. And I'm realistic to know that local authority resources are stretched and their staff are of course under pressure, and if everybody did what we did, that might not be as effective. But I've certainly found that element of professional challenge. If we need local authority support with a child and we are not getting it, we will pursue it right up to director level.
That's helpful, thank you, Jonathan. There are a few more questions that I'd like to get through. There's one which is a kind of operational one that perhaps I can pick up with you separately. People are asking about whether you would be happy as a trust to share your template letters. You've changed the tone of some of them, and whether you'd be happy for other people to see those. I'm getting a thumbs up, so that looks good. So we'll arrange that and circulate those with the slides as they come round. There's also another question, Becky, for you specifically about what the feedback to staff looks like. You talked a bit about it goes out via the student bulletin, but is there more that you can say about feedback to staff on attendance?
So yeah, we have sort of a shared Microsoft Excel document, and on that we share information. So it might be that we say that actually it's an issue which is linked to safeguarding, and these are the agencies we're working with, this is what we're doing. And we also put the percentage of that attendance on, so actually they know the reason this is a concern is because there's been a drop in percentage attendance in the last week, the last month, the last term, and then we put what the actual score is for the attendance and we share that. And then we also will add some of the things that we are doing. So whilst we add that to our MIS, so it's there, but it's kind of a weekly update as well, so that you've been given that information, because we absolutely understand teachers are really busy. They're not going to be reprinting off their class list every week to see is there anything new that's been added. So it's just a way of having a live document that people are able to engage with.
Fantastic. I think we're probably at time now in terms of additional questions that we can take. There was one here about the use of education supervision orders, which I think is directed to the department, and about how frequently these are used. They are used by local authorities across the country, and as part of the new guidance, we're obviously moving towards a position where it's not just punitive approaches that are adopted, but encouraging a kind of greater use of all of the different parental responsibility measures. So there's more to say about that, and there's events that we've been running, in fact, with local authorities, looking at the effective use of all of the different parental responsibility measures in particular. I think we'll call it there. Thanks again to Jonathan and all of the team at Sapientia for sharing their strategies and their approach to working with families, the local authority and other partners effectively.